There's a myth a lot of us grow up believing that hair loss is just a part of life. It happens. It runs in the family, and once it starts, there's no stopping it. But here's the truth. That's outdated thinking. Scientific understanding of hair loss has advanced in recent years. Today we have a deeper knowledge of underlying causes, and we've developed science-backed solutions that are both effective and safe. And that's at the very root of Happy Head. Dermatologist-led innovation offering stronger, FDA-approved ingredients that work. But what really sets Happy Head apart is how personalized it is. They don't do one-size-fits-all fixes. You fill out a comprehensive consultation, and their board-certified dermatologists design a formula specifically for your hair loss pattern, goals, and lifestyle. And whether you're early in your journey or more advanced, Happy Head offers targeted options that actually work. Topical treatments, oral capsules, or potent dual-action bundles all delivered directly to you, discreetly and freshly compounded in the U.S. Most people start seeing results in 3 to 6 months. But the real magic? It's sustainable. This isn't just about growing hair, it's about keeping it long-term. So no, hair loss isn't inevitable anymore. Visit happyhead.com and find out what's possible when science, expertise, and personalization come together. Hair happiness starts here.
I look on myself as this journeyman experiencer with a very small e, and as a storyteller, I feel the need to relay my experiences back in a way that they can assimilate.
Nick Cook, best-selling author, journalist, defense consultant, and consciousness researcher. I'm now following his book in progress on Substack. I was dealing with the family of Ingo Swann, his niece. She said, you need to talk to Nick Cook. Ingo suggested that he write and follow up with Ingo's manuscript and Ingo's work. That was how your name got to me. So then I went and looked at the Hunt for Zero Point because that's what Ingo was interested in. As I read the book, I'm thinking, wait a minute, you have a big loose end. We don't ever know who the mysterious person was who basically launched you on the trail. And I didn't know if by now you might have figured that out. And we also don't know where all of the Nazis are. Maybe we have a clue now, but that's what got me interested. I thought, well, I wanted to talk to you more, and so now's my opportunity.
Well, it's lovely to speak with you, and and I'd like to get into as much about your background and where you come from in all of this, Wendy, because I followed something of your work that I'd love to know more. But in answer to your question about the Hunt for Zero Point, it's one of those sort of teasing, open-ended things, because I never did. I think you're talking about the article that was put on my desk,
yes,
which launched me off on the quest behind the Hunt for Zero Point, which was to find out if America had cracked the secret of anti-gravity way back in the 1950s. And this article on my desk, which I think was called The G Engines Are Coming, and had been taken from a sort of 1950s magazine, I never did find out who put that on my desk. In my wilder moments, I have to say, when I think about themes like retro causality, which is the future influencing the present and the past, mm-hmm. I kind of teased myself that it may have been a future version of myself putting that article on my desk, and then me in my present state going off and finding the answers to the question that it posed about anti-gravity. But, I'm being a bit glib there. I mean, the short answer is I never did find out who put it on my desk. There may be an incredibly prosaic reason, which is that the publication I work for, which is called Jane's Defense Weekly, we operated in a big building. There must have been a couple of hundred people in there, and we had a central mail opening facility. So somebody actually went through all the posts in the morning and then distributed it to whomsoever it was meant to be directed to. I was the aerospace editor of Jane's Defense Weekly, but I did quite like to engage in some more esoteric subjects, which my colleagues shunned. So I think whenever they got to something that was a bit strange, that they couldn't sort of work out, well, where does this go to? They kind of think, the postman would think, well, I think that's so weird, that's got to be Nick Cook's department, so I'll shove it on his desk. And so it probably was as prosaic as that.
Well, I like the fact that you go into retrocausality, because as your background in the defense industry, archiving all that information and researching and an investigative journalist, you were a little bit hardcore and so much more conservative, none of this would even enter into your language, let alone saying it out loud.
Completely right. I mean, I was about to say I was a different person then. I mean, we change all the time. What I meant was, as I lay out in the book, actually, you sort of, I expose my ignorance throughout the journey of the book to everyone, to all the readers. And I am entering at that point. I mean, it really is, it is a classic sort of Joseph Campbell initiation where this article is put on my desk, introduces me to a world. I go through a looking glass at that point, and I am introduced to a world of which I have no conception, even though, I was, as you say, I'd been a defense journalist, I think, then for almost a decade. This suddenly sets me off on this new path, which is to investigate this very heretical subject by the yardstick of my publication. No one talked about anti-gravity in aerospace and defense back then, and we're talking.
The UFO people are all into that.
Well, UFO people are all into it, but UFOs were a completely taboo subject where I came from at the time. I mean, bear in mind, this was the sort of early mid-1990s. I was covering, quote, serious subjects like aerospace and defense, and you never talked about anti-gravity and you never talked about UFOs. And suddenly, there I was off on that journey.
Well, that's what I think is fascinating, too, because when you get into that, there's some other stuff, which when I was reading, I was trying to figure out, this is a nightmare? Was this, there's a part in there where you do have a very intense nightmare. And that seemed to start the deeper you got into the research and more, it just seemed a lot more intense. So was that psychological? Did you feel that you were treading ground that you needed to stay away from? What was that like?
There were times like that, and of course, that nightmare scene I seem to remember took place when I was out in the Mojave Desert. And I happen to love deserts. I've sort of been raised in deserts. My mother's side of my family were diplomats, so I traveled quite a lot to desert environments. So I've always felt very at home at deserts, and I felt very at home in the Mojave. But when you're covering a subject like this, and I was on my own, as I make plain in the book, I don't state my quest to anyone as I embark on it, or even indeed when I'm on it. Because of that tabooness that we talked about earlier, I kept it very close to my chest. So I was just going about my normal journalistic business, but I was keeping my eyes and my ears open to the centrality of that question about anti-gravity. Had America cracked the anti-gravity secret? When you're on your own out in some of those very remote places, you can feel a little bit paranoid. And I remember feeling it, quite paranoid at certain parts of that journey, thinking, oh my God, have I let the true nature of this journey, have I revealed that in some way that is going to find me in jeopardy? And by jeopardy, I didn't mean physical jeopardy. I don't think I ever felt in any sense in any physical jeopardy, but actually it was more a career jeopardy that was playing on my mind. The thought was very much, when this stuff comes out, and I think at that point I didn't even know it was going to be in the form of a book, but I knew ultimately it was going to come out in some way, shape or form. When this comes out, am I going to have a job open to me still? And unfortunately I did. But I think it was that, so all of those dynamics and that level of paranoia at a certain point got to me. And I seem to remember it happened to get to me when I was in the middle of the desert.
Well, it made sense to me because, your background. Dead on, everything has to be factual. If you can't dot the I's, cross the T's at least 50 times, and you can't even include it or consider it. So here you are on this quest, going down the rabbit hole, not sure if you're going to come out the other side intact because of the things. I mean, when you get into Ingo Swann and some of the other stuff in there that you're talking that actually deals with consciousness, this is a big leap for you. So I could see where all of a sudden the mind of what am I doing and cracking open this different realm that you'd never had any experience with sent you in a completely different direction. You know, here it is. It's a paradigm shift. You're going in a place that you didn't allow yourself to even think about before.
You've got it spot on. That's exactly how it was. And the deeper I went into that hinterland, the more sort of isolated and out of my depth I felt. And I hope that is reflected in the book, where I state my discomfort at sort of multiple waypoints of the journey. I remember going to Hal Puthoff. Dr. Hal Puthoff, as you'll know, but you know, perhaps not all listeners will know, was the head, the sort of science head of the remote viewing project set up by the CIA in the early 1970s. And he teamed up with Ingo Swann, using Ingo as his sort of chief psychic, who then became his foremost remote viewer. I went to see Hal Puthoff at a certain point in that journey, in the Hunt for Zero Point. I was okay with Hal because Hal has an aerospace dimension to him as well, a defense dimension. And I was really talking to him in the Hunt for Zero Point about the physics of zero point energy and how that might relate to, you know, in some aerospace terms. So when I entered his workspace, I was kind of in a comfort zone. But then he started to talk about remote viewing. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, where is this now taking me? Well, ultimately, as you said, Wendy, it took me to Ingo Swann, but that wasn't, as you said in your introduction, that was not during the research and writing of The Hunt for Zero Point. Ingo Swann actually got in touch with me after I'd written The Hunt for Zero Point because he'd read it. And he said, did I ever come through New York and would I like to come visit and talk to him about it, which ultimately I did.
He knew you were onto something. Not only that, you have the jargon. With your defense industry background, the intense education you have, knowing all that information gave you gave you credibility for one thing, but also a different perspective where you're going into this logically. You're not jumping off the deep end going, oh, woo, 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 this is great. And all this, you know, consciousness, metaphysical, ghosts, UFO stuff. You're going, let's check and see how this measures up. And that is what we see in your experience that you write about, being next to your wife when she has a shared death experience. That, again, I mean, I think this actually prepared you, because we're talking, mid-90s, 10 years for you to do The Hunt for Zero Point, and that came out in about 2001, 2003, and then Ingo contacts you after that at some point, and you write his book, which comes out in 2019, but before then, and that is after his death, kind of doing a timeline here. And so here, this transformation of your, basically a radical reconfiguration of your mindset because of all these experiences. You are a completely different person. I mean, that's the way I see it. Because of this, you basically said, this is not the world I grew up in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. And on some levels, you know, particularly having journalistic training, I recoiled from talking about myself. But on the other hand, what I've come to realize through doing the consciousness stuff, the departure really has been, for me, as you said in that introduction, or that particular introduction, the contrast now for me is in the way that I've pivoted to look at consciousness, which even during the Hunt for Zero Point, I had not really I'd not contemplated it. And then, as you said, so I wrote the Hunt for Zero Point, which, although it took me into this esoteric landscape, it really wasn't until my wife, Elly, had this shared death experience with her mum, who was dying, and at the point she had the SDE, she died, of course. That, for me, was like a completely new portal again. I was driven to understand what had happened to Elly, my wife. I couldn't square it away with anything that I knew. So that took me into the consciousness landscape. There again, I was looking for people or things that could help me navigate this space. And funnily enough, I returned to Ingo Swann. And as you also said just now, you know, my timeline with Ingo is sort of weird in that I wrote The Hunt for Zero Point, as you said, came out in 2001 here, in 2002 in the US. Ingo contacted me, I think, in 2002, and I think we met up that year, or it may have been the year after. And I definitely established a connection with Ingo. I mean, I felt it, and I felt weirdly like he was sort of taking me under his wing in a way. And then I saw him a couple more times before his death. He died in 2013. He kept on trying to get me to remote view Wendy, but I was a very reluctant student. And I said, again, I was being a real stick in the mud about my journalistic training. And I was saying, look, I need to keep some distance between me and the subject matter of all of this. So I don't want to get involved in remote viewing, Ingo. I'll watch from afar. And he said, you can't do that. You're either all in or you're not. Are you going to be a bystander? Are you going to write about this, or are you going to experience it? And I regret to have to say I ducked out of it. I didn't, because he was offering to teach me it, and I didn't. And then he died, of course, in 2013. And then a few years later, I was approached by his niece, Elly, who said, would I write a biography about him? And I tried for a while, but I couldn't find anything new to say about Ingo, mainly because Ingo had written it all about himself. But we did find a couple of manuscripts that were sort of 90% written, but which needed to be edited and combined. And that's what I did. And I wrote some introductions to them, and I fused them into one book. And it was after Elly's shared death experience that I really found I needed Ingo's help in getting me to navigate this new strange space that I'd found myself in, which was this consciousness anomaly space, the shared death experience, near death experience thing. And to a degree, UFOs, which, remarkable as it seems, again, I've not really looked at UFOs very much, even though I had written a book about anti-gravity, because even back then I didn't see the two as connected. Ingo was a great tutor for me, even when he had passed from this material life. Yeah. I felt his presence, guidance, and influence very distinctly.
I don't think you're done with Ingo yet. You haven't written the book yet that Ingo wants you to write. Okay, how's that? Let me just say that. You've got another book.
I'll take that.
Well, the thing I know, and see, the deal is you also had experiences as a kid with your father, when your grandmother died, and she's still making her presence known. And I think that, as I remember it, they have a little altercation about the will between Grandpa and Dad, and the lamp levitates on the table in front of them. They'd already had like lights going off, the typical stuff when somebody is trying to say, hey, I'm here. They had that, but then they were arguing and the lamp levitates, and the two of them were like, I guess that was the end of the argument, was it?
Yeah, it was. You can imagine two quite stuffed shirts. I mean, my dad wasn't actually. He was a very warm-hearted individual. My grandfather was a little stiff and rather English stiff upper lip. And you can probably imagine, you set the scene wonderfully, how they were arguing about the will and my grandmother's will, and suddenly the lamp lifted off the table and did a sort of a wobble about 6 inches above the surface of the table, and then put itself back down again with a thump.
I love it.
My grandfather, and it was great. I mean, my grandfather and my dad just looked at each other, and I think they sort of silently agreed between them that there was enough said on that particular clause of the will, and they moved on.
So at least you had these conversations, and then kind of, put them back in the other reality box that isn't your specialty, but they are there. And so this also, this suggests that even though you went into the hardcore boots on the ground of defense journalism, you knew at the back of your mind something else is going on. And that, I think, is what Ingo was trying to draw out of you. My question, he was known for, when people would get around him, they tried to close their mind off because Ingo could see around all the corners. Did he do that with you?
Oh, well, I remember, I mean, I can't tell you how wide-eyed I was when I first met Ingo on the steps of his brownstone in New York 357 Bowery. I met him there. I got out the cab, and I saw this guy who was sitting on the stoop. Who I thought he was down and out. He was wearing a sort of very tatty kind of combat jacket. He had a cap on, and he was smoking a filthy old cheroot. It was only after I'd taken a step onto the stoop that I realized it was Ingo. And I learned from other people later that this was a test.
Uh-huh.
And if you didn't like your energy at that point, that's as far as you got. I passed, so we descended into the bowels of the basement of 357 Bowery. My eyes were out in stalks because this place was sort of filled with all sorts of arcana, like, Ingo's wonderful portraits. There were stuffed animal heads. There was a library that went on forever, and it was all rather dark and mysterious. And I thought, God, what have I entered here? And of course, and I think you alluded to it as well. At the back of my mind, I'm thinking, can this guy, the world's greatest psychic, as he was once billed, read my mind? I'm trying to sort of, in my very stiff English way, I'm trying to deal with all of this that's happening. But at the same time, I'm feeling this, great kindred spirit warmth with Ingo. I liked him from the get-go for reasons I can't explain. Mm-hmm. And I just felt this connection there. And, like I said, I feel very lucky to have known him.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's so much that he opened us to with his writings, and his website's fantastic, ingoswann.com. But the other thing, okay, so moving on, when your wife has this shared death experience and you finally give yourself permission to start delving into this, and I like what you put in the essay for the Bigelow contest, that everything that you try to include with Pim von Lommel, and I don't know if you put Eben Alexander, you allude to him, and you put other stuff in there from the research for reincarnation research. You cover a broad spectrum, trying to, because this was to prove there is life after death. And Kimberly Sharp, when she talked with a woman who saw the tennis shoe outside the door or outside the hospital, you kind of cover a wide range of information. And I think as you're doing that research, you're getting deeper into this consciousness realm, which then brings you to what you're working on right now, which is The Light Beyond the Mountains. And this is basically a serialized form of a book you're writing on Substack. And fortunately, I took the plunge and said, I'm going to follow along for the ride. And I'm so glad I did, because I love the way you're going. Like I said, I still think Ingo has you in mind for something in the future. And you've also alluded to the fact that this will be a book and there will be a second book. So are you still on that same page?
Yeah, and bless your heart. Thank you for coming along for the ride. I mean, I have been blessed with some truly wonderful followers, and particularly those who parted with their hard-earned cash. So I'm very grateful for that, and to you, Wendy. I am. Yeah, that's all true. You summarized it very well. I mean, again, I sort of lay out my feelings pretty openly at the beginning of it. This is a new form for me, this literary form. I mean, it's as old as the hills, because Dickens was doing it back in the 19th century, serializing his books, and God knows how he did it just with a pen and paper. I mean, I've found it challenging enough with a laptop, and it's just this idea that, you can't go back and edit what you've already posted, chapters of the book. But I've really enjoyed it. It has taken me into the consciousness realm. I've learned some things. I mean, I've learned a lot. And I've written it slightly in the vein, or very much in the vein of The Hunt for Zero Point, at least style-wise, which is first-person narrator. That's me. I'm trying to expose the reader to the same layers and levels of knowledge as I encounter them, and the resistance I feel as I'm encountering them. Even though I've been through that initiatory experience, beforehand, I'm still having to confront a lot of new, and I'm going to use the word data here, even though that's a bit materialistic and crunchy. But that's the way I deal with stuff. And for my Bix essay, which was the essay I entered for Robert Bigelow's essay contest, inaugurating his new Consciousness Institute, as you said, I was having to lay out all of the components of what I came to see as our reality space, how we perceive reality. And I've not done this any justice because, of course, what I'm doing is I'm trying to sort of beat it down into kind of component parts. But, well, you better than anyone would know that can't be done. But to make sense of it in my head, that's what I was trying to do. So I was trying to deal with things like reincarnation, to get my head around what function it serves, in to us, and also in the reality space as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And bit by bit, it did allow me to come to certain conclusions. And right or wrong, one of them, as you'll know from The Light Beyond the Mountains, is I see us, you, Wendy, me, Nick, as individuated units of consciousness, of a source consciousness. And as those individuated units, the source consciousness experiences what it has created. There's nothing new in that. Of course, that concept is as old as the hills. But I have to be led to that myself to feel comfortable with that conclusion, if you can call it that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a bit like Ingo, again, saying you can't just acquire this knowledge, Nick. You've got to experience it. Well, I had to experience that research journey to enable me to come to the conclusion that I have, which is that our reality is an information-soaked substrate, and we see but a tiny sliver of it through what I, thanks to Professor Donald Hoffman, call the interface, our interface of perception. So we just see a tiny sliver of it, which is the materialist paradigm that we're in. But beyond it is this huge, swirling substrate of what Ingo called energies and forces that somehow coalesce into this interface by which we navigate as humans our reality space in this earthbound, material universe paradigm. So yeah, it's been a journey, and it's an ongoing one. I'm still hitched to the wagon for the rest of the ride.
I view it as you and I are both looking under the rock from different angles. Okay. And we have to come up with some way to, each of us in our own view, in our own reality box, we have to come up with how this makes sense. In terms of our science, you're trying to conform to a certain pattern to be able to say something like there is life after death. When you were exposed to grandmother sweeping the floor in the attic, moving lights and levitating a lamp, and everybody knowing that was grandma, but you can't tell anybody there's life after death because it doesn't have the science, the math, the little dots and eyes that say this is real in the Western view. Now, indigenous cultures, done deal. It's just like, yeah, okay, get over it. It happens. Then science has to catch up, which is right now, I think, is what is happening with the exploration and trying to put numbers to consciousness. But there it is. You already experienced. There is life after death. There was grandma. But on paper, you have to put like what? It was 67 or 70 pages to try and put this all together to say, yes, I've proved it. And they go, yeah, okay, you're a runner-up.
That's exactly it. There's another dimension to this for me, which is I know that I have to relate this. It isn't just a question of me sitting on this information and just acquiring it for my own knowledge. I mean, I am doing that piece of it.
Yeah.
But career-wise, first and foremost, I'm a storyteller. I want to tell this story, and then I have to go tell it. But I'm very conscious that I have to go tell it in a way that is going to alienate as few people as possible. And that's a line, funny enough, it came from my journalistic training, where I'm not a trained engineer, but as a defense and aerospace journalist, I was confronted every day with people who would confound me with all sorts of engineering terms. And I have to stop them and go, slow down there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't make me understand what you're talking about. I'm not going to be able to make the readers understand what you're talking about. So I need to go back and have you explain what you're talking to me about there. I felt the same need to do that with the consciousness story. And the only way I felt I could do that was by relating it as I myself had come to a series of obstacles and hurdles, intellectual, emotional, and otherwise, that I had to overcome to be able to get to the next stage of understanding, or perhaps we should call it gnosis, I don't know. And that was a gradual process for me. And at the same time, I'm realizing I have to now feed this information back to readers in a way that I myself was able to assimilate it, in order not to lose them along the way. I mean, of course I'm going to lose people along the way. I'm not expecting everyone to come along on this narrative journey with me. But I look on myself as this journeyman experiencer with a very small e. And as a storyteller, I feel the need to relay my experiences back in a way that they can assimilate. Because the problem I found with this whole subject, and I've come to it very recently, I've only been on this consciousness train really for a decade. And I know people who've been on it most of their lives. So I'm trying to explain it to readers in a way that doesn't completely throw them off the track at the very beginning. Because when I was confronting this, having at the age of 50-something, to acquire all this knowledge, it was too much. I mean, it was just, I didn't know where to begin. So what I'm trying to do with The Light Beyond the Mountains is take readers on a path that allows them to assimilate some of this stuff in sort of bite-sized chunks by going on that journey with me.
What I see is it was a preparation. You have honed your skills as an investigative reporter, as a journalist, as a writer, a storyteller, to be able to delve into this material, even though it isn't your area of expertise. You had to have the other areas of expertise to be able to do what you're doing and bring life to the story, and emerge into it, or from it, immerse into it is a better word, and then emerge and say, here's the language, here's the context. And you had to be able to be a storyteller first. And I think The Hunt for Zero Point was an excellent way of getting you familiar with the kind of storytelling you wanted to bring to the equation with consciousness. And then these experiences that help you integrate that sense of, what do I do when I'm in it, and how do I find the language to translate this? Because a lot of this isn't translatable. It isn't until you have that first total immersion of seeing something that is not supposed to exist, hearing something that others can't, and you hear it loud and clear. How do you bring that to life? Well, your storytelling is your form of connection, communication, and interface with reality that not everyone is access or has access to. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's lovely to hear for me, because there have been times in my life, I'm sure this must be true for so many people, if not everybody, where you look back in your life and you think, it's as it's happening, I should say. There are moments in your life, perhaps when you're stuck, and you think, God, how did I get to this place? And why am I stuck here? And why did I waste my time doing X or Y or Z when I should have been doing A, B, or C to further my life and move forward? And then, we get back to that retrocausal thing again, when you're able to look back and go, okay, I understand now why I was stuck at that point. I understand why I was being nudged in that direction when it made no sense to me at the time. That all makes sense now. And the way you've just described it about me, it's very hard to be objective about your own life. But the way you've just described it to me, is nice for me to hear, because it tells me, as it should tell all of us, that nothing in this life is wasted, and I think I've sort of picked up on that now as a writer, where, I view my life, and I view life in general as story. There's a wonderful medium called Suzanne Giesman, who helped me with my research in my Bix essay, my Bigelow essay. And she said something profound like, we're all story in material form, bodily form. And that is the way I see life now, reality out there. And I love to be able to turn facts or, the stories of people's lives. I mean, brackets, part of my day job, I'm a ghostwriter. I ghostwrite other people's stories. And I love that, the long-winded and rambling way, Wendy, of saying, thank you for that characterization of what I do, because I probably couldn't have seen it myself, but it makes sense to me now that you said it.
Learning isn't easy. And sometimes we're in the middle of learning when we're writing or researching something. And that takes time, and sometimes tears and sweat and questioning, what the heck am I doing this for? Like you said. And then all of a sudden, after you've crossed that, when you've emerged out of that, it's like, oh, well, that was so obvious. Why didn't I get it? Because you hadn't lived it. You hadn't lived it. And that, when I deal with people who ask more, why isn't there more research on consciousness? Why can't we prove it? Because this is happening and I'm experiencing it. And why don't people believe it? Well, that's it. That's it. Until more people have experienced these kinds of things, we have to find better ways to talk about it. And you introducing it in your stories gives us a way, because you have technique, because you have educated yourself on how to be an excellent storyteller. All right. Thank you, Ingo, too.
Well, thank you, Ingo. I find a lot of my day is spent actually thank you, Ingo. But thank you for that, because story and form, which is ironic given what we're talking about, is important to me. And, I spend a lot of time trying to think how to tell a story, because it is, as well as everyone who reads will know, story is not linear. It can be, but the stories I like to tell are fairly non-linear. They jump around, they have flashbacks, they go forwards and backwards in time, and all of that. And that's quite complicated. I'll probably descend from my garret downstairs at the end of the day, and Elly, my wife, looks at me and she says, "God, you've been playing 5-dimensional chess again, haven't you?" And I go, "Yeah, I've been trying to stitch a story together, and it might have been a long day trying to make that happen." But it's a wonderful thing to be able to do, and I derive endless satisfaction from it. But without wishing to be too trite about it, as going back to what Suzanne said again, and I think her actual quote was, "We are all story in dense form." It is really fun to look on your life, or in that way, to see yourself as story, and then actually it becomes quite epic. I mean, any one of us then has, if you look at it through that lens, our lives are pretty epic for all the reasons you just said. There's tears, there's joy, there's every kind of emotion along the way. Emotions, by the way, I think that are fed back into the quote system of our universe, our the information substrate that underpins our universe. I think that is central. Those sorts of experiences are central to the evolution of the system, making it learn and grow from each and every, let's say one of us, but from each and every thing that's in the material universe and in the non-material realms that we can't see. So it's all really important. And sort of one last thing I'd love your thoughts on too, Wendy, is I've come to read my life now, as I look back on it, in a number of ways. One of them is just the material waypoints of your life. But, as I begin to tell in The Light Beyond the Mountains, and particularly now as we're getting towards the end of it, and I'm doing that retrocausal thing of looking back, the instigation point of the journey, as you may remember, is I'm hanging around on the edge of Area 51 in Nevada, as you do, and I see, this is in 1992, I see, after the sun goes down, it's quite dark, a shining orange orb that looks like the sun rising behind the mountains where Groom Lake, Area 51 is. And this is the sort of the instigation, the inciting point of my journey, because later on, I need to make sense of what I saw. And as this sounds pretty dense, and I hope it's not as dense as it sounds when you come to read it in the book, but later on in The Light Beyond the Mountains, I start talking about plasma physics. And plasma physics, which I think is key to our understanding of this interface through which we receive our reality, the way we perceive reality. I see now this connection between that plasma orb that I saw over Area 51 and the plasma physics that are central in my viewpoint, at any rate, to our understanding of the interface via which we navigate reality. So that's another way I can read my life, through symbolism. I find that fascinating, that there are those depth layers that we can interpret our existence from. You know infinitely more about this than I do. What do you feel about that?
I was really thrilled you started getting into it, because I have a photograph that I've taken, and it's maybe 15 years or so, because I've had my metaphysical stuff has been ongoing since I was a kid. Not that I owned it or that I acknowledged and knew about it, because that wasn't anything you're supposed to talk about. However, it's there. And when I got this picture, people were saying, "Oh, that's angels" and stuff like that. Well, it doesn't look like that. It looks like an ink blot, something, only colorful, and it's moving through the yard. And so I'm thinking, yes, finally, somebody is getting another a look at this and putting language to it, that I can finally have a context for one of my experiences. But the thing that I got, which is so funny, because as you're mentioning what Susan Giesman said, that reminded me of, I did an interview with Carl Sagan, and one of the quotes that he's known for is, "We're a way for the cosmos to know itself." All right. My thing with Carl Sagan when I did the interview was I wanted to be able to ask him the best questions. And I was so awestruck that I didn't think anything I said would be good enough, and then my questions weren't good enough. And in retrospect, when you're saying, you were with Ingo and you opted out of doing the remote viewing, there are moments in our lives when we take it so seriously. And when I take my ability so seriously, it's like, I'm not good enough. I should be doing this better, or like somebody else does it. And it's like, we each have our moment here. And whatever my experience is, it is unique. And the only way I can validate someone else's experience is to do the best job I can of asking questions, of questioning myself, of being curious enough not to take something else at face value because somebody already gave it a description or an explanation. I keep going beyond that. What is the next level of knowing? And so what I see you doing as you progress through all of this is brilliant, because it's drawing a map. It's leaving breadcrumbs for people to see this is how it's done. You keep questioning. You don't stop because you think you know it. You know something, but you keep going. And what's the other angle? What's under the other edge of the rock? And that's how, that's a long answer, but I hope that makes sense.
It's wonderful, because as you're speaking, I'm sort of drawing this mental picture of what you're saying and describing. I'm getting this sense of sort of, here am I meandering through a kind of labyrinth. Well, that's just the path I've taken. And suddenly looking off to the left and the right, I'm realizing there are all of these other paths that I didn't take, but which would have led me off into God knows where. And that's what's so amazing about this whole subject, is that each and every one of us can take those other paths, and they lead to an infinite number of destinations, which, by the way, of course, we'll never get to, because there's always somewhere else to get to. So that is what is truly fascinating about it. And I love hearing about other people's experiences infinitely more than the pathway that I've taken, because there's just no end to miraculous tales. I mean, tales that I know I can verify. I mean, I can verify to one level to satisfy the journalist in me that the events as described by this person took place. But there comes a point where I can't describe the truly miraculous nature of that particular thing, whether it was a near-death experience, an angelic vision, an orb encounter, whatever, So it's multi-layered, it's multifaceted, and that's what makes it endlessly fascinating for me anyway.
Here's the metaphysical. When I was a kid, 10 or 11, I'm in the bedroom, I'm having a friend as a sleepover, and she says, and she's practicing her proselytizing, saying, do you accept the Holy Spirit? And I said, to myself, why wouldn't I? Of course. So I tell her, yes, I accept the Holy Spirit. Within seconds, my whole body glowed. I just felt it warm, and I remember it as the glowworm experience. And so I shared it. I said, wow, that was really great. And I lost a friendship because I was weird.
Really?
I was weird. Okay. So there it is. There's the Holy Spirit just in the flesh, and I knew what it was. And so that was like, okay, this is practice what you preach kind of thing. I learned a lot from that going forward on what I could share and what happens when it didn't make sense, even though that's the person who triggered it.
Yeah. That's such a key, isn't it? I mean, I had an experience at university where we lived in this farmhouse on the edge of a place called Dartmoor, which is down in Devon. It's a sort of very kind of barren, beautiful but barren sort of spot in England. And we lived in this old farmhouse on the edge of it. The rumour was that it was haunted. And of course, being students, you don't take any notice of any of that stuff. But until my very last night in this place, which I lived in for 2 years, I was the last member of the household to do my final exams, university exams. So everyone else had gone home, and I was the last person left. And a friend of mine came over and brought a pizza takeaway or something. And he said to me words to the effect, just as he was leaving, do you know, he said, Nick, I don't know how anyone can spend a moment alone in this spooky old place. I mean, it's just, spooky. Of course, he then disappeared. Night falls. I go to bed. I've got an exam the following morning. And I'm thinking about what he said. And I'm tossing and turning in my bed, and I'm thinking, and finally I say to myself, okay, Nick, that's enough. You've got an exam to do the next morning. And I say to myself, there are no ghosts here. And at the moment I say that, there are two incredibly loud thumps on my door, my bedroom door. And my bedroom door is literally about 3 or 4 feet from my head. Mm-hmm. Well, you can imagine, I sit up in bed, I set my light, and then I do all the things that I'm trained to do. Or not, I wasn't that far because I was a student, but is innate in me, which is I look out the window thinking it's got to be a student prank. It was a farmhouse, so I thought maybe an animal was out there. Anyway, I went through every permutation, and I thought, no, I'm now out of here. This is not good. So I unfortunately I had a car there, so I grabbed my car keys, I had a few more adventures trying to get out of the house because the lights had all gone off. Funnily enough, that shaped my worldview, but in a really weird way, in a similar sort of way to what you described, which is that was my sort of shutdown moment, because the next day I did the exam and I said to myself, that never happened last night. Whatever I experienced did not happen. So I buried it away for a long time and only came back to it in later years as something to re-examine and go, no, that was also something that I was being taught at the time, but I just didn't see it as that.
Yeah.
When it happened. I just saw it as something really frightening. But it was something that I use as a sort of pointer on this consciousness journey to something, a lesson that I was meant to absorb about something which I'm still trying to figure out.
Well, it was a very gentle way of saying, dude, wake up. You're not alone.
Yeah.
And just, and it just left it at that to let you ponder and basically crucify yourself.
Yep.
You did all the hard work.
So.
That's it, though. That's what we do in terms of coming to our own sense of reality, of, is this real? Can I deal with it? In some ways, some of this stuff it can be intimidating until you kind of decide, well, how does it work for me? And should I be afraid of it? And that once you get over that hurdle of it isn't real, but it's happening, then you figure out how you're going to deal with it. And for much of my stuff, it is unreal to a lot of people, but it's my reality day to day. So I've learned to be more comfortable with allowing it to be my reality and not worrying about what other people think, because they can't make it go away. It's mine.
No.
It's mine. And that when you finally say, hey, this is mine, I want to explore it. And with me, that glow thing, when I experienced learning to channel, and the guides told me that you glow. And I'm like, glow? So I put myself, the kid part, even though I'm an adult, I put myself under the sheet to see if I glowed, and also very naive. And I couldn't find any place that glowed. But I thought, okay, well, they say we glow, so we glow. Well, here in the last, 10, 15 years, they have identified and finally admitted there are parts of our brain that glow. And we do have that bioluminescent, whatever. But this was like, 30 years ago when I was getting this from these non-corporeal beings trying to help me learn. And I feel comfortable with that because Ingo Swann had that same psychic help, from others who are not physical. But it's taken a while to become more comfortable with just talking about that. And so, waiting until someone else has some kind of extraordinary experience to help them loosen those the restrictions they have on their reality before I will even have a conversation, because and I can have it with you right now because, well, nobody's listening. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
It's just you and me. It's okay.
Yeah.
But that's often the way it works. Is that you wait until the coast is clear and somebody else who might get what you're saying because they have had their own transformative event that says, well, there's more here than what we can see. So let's start dealing with that and exploring that and allowing that to be a greater reality that is a part of us.
Yeah, no, completely. What do you think how are we meant to use this information in this life and on this planet, do you think?
Well, personally, I think we're supposed to expand our own awareness that we are not alone and that all the other entities here, plants, animals, bugs, air, everything is part of consciousness. And when we start allowing that, we start in some way connecting, communicating, collaborating with it. And I think that's the next maybe possibly 200 or 300 years when we get to that point. And I believe the indigenous cultures, especially Aborigine, I believe that they had that. And then our technology has taken us in a different direction. But we may need the tech and the indigenous background to be able to take us out to the galaxy, where we are aware as we step out that we are not just a meat suit in some kind of a big wrapper, which is why we tend to see those who are supposedly the ETs or the extra dimensionals that are coming here. We don't see beyond whatever they're encased in. Well, that's our problem too, is that whatever we're encased in, we think this is it. And it's so much more. It's that unfathomable and unstated essence that we are at our core, that your wife saw when she stepped out, that everything is connected. And when we start dealing, I believe we are evolving to understand that and to be aware that our thoughts are a very strong component of who we are. So I think this is our evolution, and we are meant to expand, to explore, to integrate our consciousness with the other conscious beings in our galaxy. How's that?
Yeah. I like that. And I also think, ironically, that your timescale may be a bit accelerated by, here's the irony, technology, in that artificial intelligence, I think, is forcing us to confront ourselves and who we are much more deeply than we've had to before. I mean, of course, there are going to be people who are going to just want to embrace the whole AI thing completely and go down a sort of transhumanist route of integrating computer chips into their head and all the rest of that. And if they want to do that, that's fine by me. But for my part, I find the more I'm confronted by technology, even though I write about it, I want to explore the part that technology can't reach. It's the thing that you've just described, which is the innate part of us that is connected to everything and everyone, not just on this planet, but, across this universe and into others. That part, for the moment, technology can't access. Only we can by going inward, by realizing, as you've just laid out, that and as Elly, my wife, saw when she had that shared death experience, that everything is connected and all knowledge is there. It might be difficult to bring back to this realm, and that's what Elly found. She said, I knew everything, but I couldn't bring it back. Mm-hmm. And that's probably because most of us aren't meant to have all of that knowledge in one dollop. We've got to, as you say, we've got to go out and find it out and experience it. And, that's the adventure, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The thing that I got, and this is again from the guidance, there's two points. One, I had a dream, and the dream was very realistic, and I was in this space where I had access to, and I refer to it as an angel book. And I was so thrilled because it had all my answers. It told me exactly why I had decided to come here. It told me what was going on. It told me all the behind the scenes. I knew it. I was going to come back, and I was going to just, charge on and ace this life. So as I'm leaving that space and going through this dense area of like a fog, a deep fog, I can get through it, but I can't hold on to the book. And I woke up from that dream angry. Because I thought, what? You let me know that, and I couldn't keep it. All right, so there's that. But the other part, when I would deal with these non-corporeal entities, they said what we are in this life, if you look at it as an alphabet, A to Z, each time we incarnate, we are one letter. The rest of it's all there. It just doesn't come with us. And when we go back home, it's there. But as we live each life, we only have access to a small portion. The evolution comes when we begin to access more of that as we are separate. And that, for me, is the way I, understand this, integrating what I can right now and trying to give language to it and asking better questions and knowing that each day there's an opportunity to learn from, like what you're doing, when you're talking about Donald Hoffman, knowing that there's all these people researching and learning and advancing our awareness, that when we do access AI, we won't want it to replace us. we'll want it to enhance us and allow us to go to places we can't go because our bodies are too fragile. But when we are connected, like the shamans who can influence the weather, the shamans who can say that these things are going to happen because they have that consciousness awareness, that expanded knowing, and because they've practiced it, they've allowed it. They haven't rejected it because it doesn't have a science to say it's true. It's their truth. So they just do it. And that's what I think we are learning better in some ways, to say that if this is my truth, then I better explore it, examine it, and like you say, with your writing, figure out a way to tell the story, not to frighten somebody or turn them off, but to engage them and inspire them. Set the world on fire in a good way.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And actually, you sort of articulated my what do you call it? I hate to call it purpose. I mean, I don't think of it in those terms, but it's my shtick, the thing that I do. I mean, it is to inspire, to make curious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's it in a nutshell. It's that. For me, that's been a wonderful thing. Is curiosity. I thank God every day I've been blessed with curiosity, because it's led me to some fantastic places. It's occasionally got me into trouble, but it's
it does.
Particularly as a defense journalist. But anyway, I'm still here to tell the tale. I always manage to get out of it. But yeah, curiosity is a wonderful thing.
You wouldn't have been able to go to the places that you went to, exploring that and getting that information for the Hunt for Zero Point, if you didn't have that background. That was your key. That was the way you got in the door. And that's like, whoa, that is so brilliant, that the kind of information you were able to access. I do think there are programs that are still deep six that we have no idea what's going on. But I also think it's also one-dimensional. I think there are programs beyond what we're able to access, beyond, this physical realm, that are also happening. And I'm looking forward to exploring and having access to that information at some point along the way, maybe not in my lifetime, but knowing that we can only see so much and we can only access so much. And there's only, you have a certain amount of days in your life that this is doable. And so with that, there's just, I think, always going to be a piece left undone, so we can come back and go to the next level. Ian Stevenson said, these folks proved that you do reincarnate, and that's part of everyone potentially knowing more through those kinds of experiences. I've interviewed people who've done it. One guy, I mean, there's several in my archives, and it's just extraordinary, the kind of things that they remember from past lives. And so I just think this is such a broader range of experiences and knowing that we have yet to access that might unlock a few more doors.
Absolutely. Well, I hope in my next incarnation I remember a few more letters than A or B, Wendy. But maybe you're right. That's the point, is that we don't get to remember more than a letter or two, and that's the beauty of it.
Well, mine's a big letter. It's a W. Okay, so there it is. That's why I've got a full plate. I think that's what they implied. You have enough, child. You have enough. Just work with that while you're at it. We might let you have more, But so okay. So you are there's another book coming after this. Are there? You're in the middle of it, and this is again on Substack. And anybody can. I mean, if you want to follow the whole thing, yes, there is. There is a price point, but the cool thing is that there are other people who are asking questions and part of this, and I like that. I like that kind of a round table when you talk to people and people throw out their ideas or their questions. And it's just a different kind of experience. Yeah,
and it's been a joyous one for me. I entered the whole Substack thing, as I'm sure you have, thinking, well, this is new and is this going to work and all the rest of it. It's been different. I've really liked it. I've liked it for its interactiveness, its interactive element. And as you said, I've, got some wonderful people in my forum from whom I have learned, as much, if not more than, what I'm imparting. So it's that interactive part of it, I think, is really good.
Well, you said you had an offer at the very beginning from a publication company or, a publisher saying, well, we know you already have 2 chapters. Stop there. Don't continue what you're doing. We'll go ahead and publish it as is. I think it would have been there's so much depth and dimension to it as you have gone through and included us in the process that wouldn't have been there if you had gone the other direction.
I think that's very true. And, at the time, again, we touched on this half an hour ago or whenever, it's that sort of retro-causal thing where at the time I'm sort of walking out of this meeting and I'm kicking myself going, should I have actually said yes to that publishing offer? But no, it unfolded the way it was meant to unfold. And as you said, I have found the experience of doing it this way, I think, a very rich one, and probably richer than, because I've learned something from it. I didn't think I could write a book that was serialized, but I had to, because that was the nature of the platform. It required me to serialize it, and I've really learned along the way. And you can teach an old dog new tricks. I've learned some, and that's been great. I've really liked being challenged and being put out of my professional comfort zone for a while, and it's been good for me.
Okay, a question. Bigelow, you were in a group with that, and it was suggested or implied that there might be another, expanded opportunity with that group. Is there anything coming from in that he has the Consciousness Studies group now? And I haven't heard any updates on that.
Nor have I, to be honest, because I thoroughly enjoyed the interactions that I had within that group when it was extant, when it was happening. But it sort of petered out, or unless everyone else is still doing it and I'm somehow excluded the party. But I don't think that's the case. I think it's sort of the group of advisors that Robert Bigelow assembled around him shortly after the essay contest, I think it just naturally sort of dissipated. I think Robert is still on that consciousness path, and that his institute still goes forward. I've not had anything to do with it, I think probably for a couple of years, but I really enjoyed, as I said, that experience while I had it, because there were some wonderful people in the group like Jeffrey Mishlove and Jeffrey Kreipel and people like that, and I learned a lot from them. It was interesting, but I don't know where it is now. Just a short answer.
I was just curious. Yeah, I did get the 5 volumes. It was wonderful because he was very generous, and as many people who requested the volumes that they put out as a result of that contest, and then, like I said, there are 5 like encyclopedia type volumes, collectible, that gave everybody's paper a nice presentation. And then if you ask for that set, then he sent them, and that was a nice perk. Have you got? Yeah, I've got the set.
Oh, good, because they're spectacularly put together and beautifully bound and all the rest of it. So I'm really glad you've got a physical copy. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I was shocked. I was like, "Wow, this is excellent." So I put my name in as soon as it was like, "Yeah, right here." Afraid that they might run out, So, but he made sure that anybody who wanted one got them. So that was pretty cool. Now, next book, you have a clue?
Too early for that for me. Now I sort of I come out of one. The Light Beyond the Mountains is drawing to a close, and I sort of need a bit like a farmer's field. I need to go fallow for a bit and collect myself. But there definitely will be further adventures. I need to find the narrative thread through them. And I've already got, there's no shortage of research material. It's telling that story again. What story do I want to tell with the material that I've got? So that I'm still contemplating. I've got, fortunately, plenty to get on with outside of the strict book writing discipline. So, fortunately, I'm not idle. So, it's good.
I suggest a trip to a haunted house. Just maybe a week or a month there, just to kind of clear your thoughts.
Well, I'm sure it would do that. Yeah.
With a broom, just
maybe,
a broom in the upstairs, like 2 levels, a broom upstairs, just, to see if anything sweeps by.
There you go. Yep. Click clack of the broom. And, I did actually, funnily enough, I did pass by that house because I was raised by my grandparents for a bit, as I describe in the essay and also in the book. And about a month ago, I dropped by the home to see if it was still there, and it was closed down. It was like, it was up for sale, so I wasn't able to go and have a look. But I had been to I dropped by probably about 20 years ago, and I knocked on the front door, and I asked the inhabitants. I said, I used to live here, and I didn't want to tell them that it was haunted. I thought that would be or it had been haunted when I lived there.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with a phrase that I thought would probably allow me to find out what I wanted to know, but without tipping them off about anything untoward in the house. So I just said, "Is this a happy house?" Mm-hmm. And she said, "Yes, it is. It's a very happy house." So I felt that was a nice. I went away from it thinking, good. Whatever happened here has moved on, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. There are ways to kind of be subtle about that. I love this is such a lively space. Might be too much.
Yeah, just a bit.
So, Nick, I appreciate your time. It's been wonderful following your work with on Substack, and I think that if anybody still is interested in that it will be there after you're completed.
Yeah, and it will continue too. It's going to continue on in a new form. In fact, I'm just sort of coming up with that now, Wendy, that it will go forward. So I won't stop writing on Substack when the book finishes.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a different interactive aspect to it. That part will continue. The book will be there for people to read still. And in time, as my fallow period, sort of reaches new levels of fecundity and, blossoming, I will then feel ready to go and tackle a new book project. But, so Substack carries on for the foreseeable future.
Okay. And the book is Light Beyond the Mountains. So if you're trying to do a Google search, find it, Substack, Nick Cook. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I don't think so, except I genuinely have really enjoyed our conversation, and, I hearing as much hearing about your own experiences and as well as talking about my own. And, so thank you for a really enjoyable hour and a bit. I've just really enjoyed it. It's lovely to meet and talk with a fellow traveler.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. And I'm looking forward to all of your next Beyond Farming.
Well, thank you. That'll be its working title for the time being.
Yeah, Beyond Farming.
nickcook.works. Follow his book in progress on Substack. Thanks for listening. Stay curious.
There's a myth a lot of us grow up believing that hair loss is just a part of life. It happens. It runs in the family, and once it starts, there's no stopping it. But here's the truth. That's outdated thinking. Scientific understanding of hair loss has advanced in recent years. Today we have a deeper knowledge of underlying causes, and we've developed science-backed solutions that are both effective and safe. And that's at the very root of Happy Head. Dermatologist-led innovation offering stronger, FDA-approved ingredients that work. But what really sets Happy Head apart is how personalized it is. They don't do one-size-fits-all fixes. You fill out a comprehensive consultation, and their board-certified dermatologists design a formula specifically for your hair loss pattern, goals, and lifestyle. And whether you're early in your journey or more advanced, Happy Head offers targeted options that actually work. Topical treatments, oral capsules, or potent dual-action bundles all delivered directly to you, discreetly and freshly compounded in the U.S. Most people start seeing results in 3 to 6 months. But the real magic? It's sustainable. This isn't just about growing hair, it's about keeping it long-term. So no, hair loss isn't inevitable anymore. Visit happyhead.com and find out what's possible when science, expertise, and personalization come together. Hair happiness starts here.